I'm Liz Abinante. I work here at New Relic as a software engineer. I am a newcomer to Portland, so this is also my first Future Talk, which is really fun and exciting for me. And today I'm going to talk to you about programming and education in the American dream. This is kind of every time I tell people I give this talk, they're like, what is this about? That's really big, Liz. So just to kind of give you a quick overview of the stuff I'm going to cover, I'm going to talk about the Learn to Code movement, how it all got started, and a little bit about how we actually teach kids in school. And how do we relate all this to the American dream in programming? This is where it gets really, really tense. And then talking about actually educating programmers, where all of this comes together. So let's just start with the Learn to Code movement, which I can say that I am a part of. More on that later. So how did this all get started? It's kind of not something that you can pinpoint to an exact day or an exact year, an exact month. And there were a few things, but I want to focus on 4 specific things. Startup success stories, the national spotlight, the availability of curriculum, and a lower barrier to entry for some technologies. Facebook has a movie, like a company that types for a living and makes people talk to each other online. They got a movie about how their company started. This is how fascinated people are with startups and the success. The concept of coming from nothing and becoming a billionaire overnight is just so appealing to people that they want to learn more about it. And it doesn't have anything to do with the stock market or how successful a company is really on paper, but there's this mystique around startups and being successful and bootstrapping yourself, whether or not you have funding. And Mark Zuckerberg in 2014 was the 22nd most powerful person on the Forbes 400 list. And I had never actually looked at the Forbes 400 list before. Not really my thing, not doing economics much, but I did notice this funky thing at the bottom, a self-made score of 8. And I was like, what is this? Oh, look, a helpful tip that will tell me what it is. So I read up on it. Turns out they invented this in October 2014. And basically what it is a score of 1 to 10. 1 indicating that the fortune was completely inherited, somebody who is silver spoon from birth, basically, trust fund kids kind of, who are doing nothing to actively increase their wealth. They're just kind of sitting on it and swimming in their pools of money. A 10, by contrast, is somebody who had an insane journey that had a lot of steps to overcome and were actively prevented at some steps along the way. And just for a comparison, Mark Zuckerberg is an 8. He comes from a middle to upper class background. He wasn't handed things, but he also didn't have a lot of things in his way. Whereas Oprah, you may have heard of her, is a 10 because she dealt with family trauma, abuse, death of family members, rape, incest. Her life was only 2 points harder than Mark Zuckerberg's, according to Forbes. So there's a little perspective for you. I know. And then when they looked at the numbers over time, they looked back to 1984, and less than half of the people on that list they considered self-made, which is about a 6 or higher. And this year, almost 3/4 of the Fortune 400 created their own fortune, so self-made score of 6 or higher, which is nuts. Like that's a huge change. And it's only like 20-something%, but that's a lot of billionaires who did not get raised with just wealth coming out of their ears. And so we've got all this attention paid to startups because it's fun to make money, it's fun to write code, it's fun to build companies, and it gets so much national attention that the Hour of Code gets White House sponsorship from Obama, and he talks about how you shouldn't just play with your phone, you should program it. So everybody gets it in their head that they should be doing this. They should be doing this thing. So we made the curriculum more available to people. And by we, I mean, the greater ephemeral we, not, me, because too much work there. But it's easier to learn something if you have different ways to learn it. If we all had to learn to read the same way, if we all had to learn math the same way, only a few people would be good at it. It's just difficult to learn all the same way. And so we started to see in-person courses. I used to run the Girl Develop It chapter in Chicago, which offered low-cost introductory classes, like $50 for a weekend workshop to come and learn to write JavaScript. That was not around before 2010, as far as I know. And then you start to see these extensive and very expensive development courses pop up. They are 9 weeks long, 9 months long. There's a huge range of them, and we can talk about them later, but these programs played on the anyone can learn to code movement, and they also benefited from it hugely because the more successful they were, the more money they made. On the other side, we started to have more free and affordable curriculum. Programs like Team Treehouse, Code Academy, and Code School, all available online, free for a trial, maybe $30 a month. But this is how a lot of people that I met in the last year learned how to program. This is their first approach to programming. It wasn't a book. It wasn't a class. It was going onto Team Treehouse and being like, HTML looks like fun, because it is. And it lets you get your feet wet without a huge commitment. You don't have to quit your job. You don't have to take out a loan. You don't have to hire a babysitter. You can wait until the kids are asleep and spend an hour or two trying it out. You don't have to make a big commitment or a big life change. You also get the bonus of learning things that have been selected for learning objectives. So you're learning about computer science curriculum inside of your JavaScript or Ruby or what have you, language classes. So you kind of get a lot of bang for your buck. And we took it a step further. Typing into a little REPL read, evaluate, print loop that just types some stuff and then it spits out, analyzes. Typing into that is kind of boring and really one-sided, and not everybody learns that way. So there are now programs that offer one-on-one mentorship, distance mentorship. They're a little bit more expensive, a few $1,000s, but you still don't have to quit your job. They're still part-time, and they're still giving you personal attention. So it's not quite the same as having a one-on-one mentor in person with you 20 hours a week. It's not the same as quitting your job and going to a 40-hour-a-week program, but you do get that personal attention. So if you're not somebody who can just learn from watching a screencast, this gave you a big leg up, but still required a little bit of a financial commitment. Last, a lower barrier to entry for new technologies. And really the things that I'm most excited about with this are things like cloud development environments, which as a professional developer, no, I do not use in my day-to-day. But when I was learning to develop, holy shit, this was super helpful. I didn't have to maintain a dev environment on my local machine, which was the hardest thing for me to learn. I was not super familiar with Terminal. I was always afraid I was going to explode my computer. I didn't know how to manage different versions of Ruby, but I knew how to program in Ruby. And so it was kind of scary to potentially ruin a computer I could not replace. Like the actual fear of turning this beautiful computer I've had for 8 years into a brick. I was very scared of this for a long time, and I still kind of am. So this alleviated cost for me and complication for me. And it's super, super helpful for programs like the YWeb Career Academy, which is a nonprofit run by the YWCA in Madison, Wisconsin. They teach students on $300 Chromebooks. They learn Ruby, Node, HTML, CSS, and they can do that on $300 computers because of those cloud development environments. So you don't have to buy the $2,000 MacBook or the however much PCs cost. I don't know. You can do it on a $300 Chromebook or at the library or at school or at a friend's house. You just need the internet, which is huge. We also have simple languages. I say simple because, it's a relative difficulty, but they're documented so well. Reading the documentation for Ruby is actually surprisingly easy. It's a little scary at first because, programming, but it's easier to parse than, say, learning what a pointer is. I still don't know what a pointer is. So, okay, see if somebody knows what a pointer is. But with those simple languages, you also have an emphasis on not just being an engineer. Not everyone who knows how to code or learns to code is an engineer. They're designers and they're product managers. They're managers. They're regular people at your company who don't actually write the code, but knowing how to code helps them better understand their job. If you work with a designer who, say, knows how to write JavaScript, you might get completely different mockups from them than a designer who doesn't. And I can't say whether or not that's true, but I suspect it would be, if you know what happens when you click versus when you tap. And you don't just have to learn to code to be an engineer. You can learn to code to be more technical. And so it's not just limiting yourself on one plane of skills. It's applying those skills in a way that appeals to your interests. Mobile design, awesome. Responsive design, awesome. But How many engineers do you know who hate CSS? Lots. I'm not one of them. And so we've got everybody learning to code now because we've got these cheap cloud computing platforms and awesome computers and really cool curriculum. So everybody can do this. Anyone can learn to code. And you hear this a lot. You hear the actual sentence, anyone can learn to code. And I call bullshit. There's a huge discrepancy between the marketing and the reality. And I can say this because I lived it. And so I've kind of told you a little bit about myself and learning how to program and being scared of turning my precious, precious computer into a brick. But to understand how far away I was from technology, I have to embarrass myself a little and admit that my lifelong dream was to be a high school teacher. I don't know why. I had this dream of injecting my love for literature and history into children and making them become so passionate that they succeeded and wrote these beautiful novels and yay! And I realized that there is nothing more soul-sucking than teaching high school students. Thank God, I realized this. And so, partway through my career, after I got my master's degree, I was kind of floating in these non-technical jobs at startups, not really knowing how the internet worked. And then I finally learned a little bit about it and was like, hey, this is cool. So I went to a code boot camp instead of becoming a teacher. And I say instead with question mark because I spend a lot of my free time teaching people how to code themselves. So I'm still a teacher. I still love to teach. I still love to learn. So that part hasn't changed about me at all. The only difference now, though, is that I know the internet is not powered by Excel spreadsheets. There are databases. I learned that. I was so proud when I learned that. And so I learned my first programming language in 2013. Actually, just about this time in 2013, I was writing a little Tamagotchi puppy program for the terminal in Ruby. It was just the funnest thing for me because, if you didn't take it out to go to the bathroom, it died. It's a really good exercise in learning logic. And so I didn't know that programming was really a thing that normal people did. I didn't know any technical workers. I knew teachers and social workers and janitors and people who worked at libraries and fast food, and I didn't know anybody who did anything with a computer unless it was Scantrons at school. It just didn't appeal to me as a career opportunity because I didn't see anybody doing it. So I never pursued it until I was exposed to it. And one of the hardest things for me going into this boot camp program and being told that I could learn to code, that it was really easy, and then after these 9 weeks, I could be an engineer, was that learning to code is not the same thing as learning to program. And oh my God, I could have saved myself so much stress and so many emotional breakdowns if somebody had told me this, or if I had put 2 and 2 together and realized this from the beginning. And we're not saying when we say anyone can learn to code, we're not saying anyone can be an engineer. You can definitely try. But it's just like learning to read. Anyone can learn to read, but it's not the same as comprehending and analyzing the things that you're reading. There are 2 different skills. And you can have both. You can have one. You can try for both. You can try for one. Just because you only go for one doesn't mean you failed or you haven't achieved. And that's the problem with these programs. We're setting people up to say, anyone can learn to code equals you can get a job. And so we learn during these programs that writing code is just typing to a very specific set of rules. That's what I do for a living. I type. The people that I work with hear me say this all the time, and they always laugh, but that's what I do. I put fingers to keyboard, and I have to make sure the white space is right, or it doesn't work. And just like being a good writer involves learning from people who've done it before, having a mentor who's maybe published a book, or taking a short story class, or reading a lot, being a good developer, writing good code comes from reading other people's code, comes from learning from other people who have done it, whether that's in an interpersonal interaction or reading their books. You get better at it the more you're exposed to it. And so in 9 weeks, you can only get so much exposure to other people who aren't beginners just like you. And so while I was in this program, people would say to me, it's easy. They would say this to me all the time. They would say, it's easy, just do X, Y, Z. And then they would grab my keyboard and they would type some stuff and magical things would happen. I don't know what they did, but when they hit enter, everything worked. And it was something I was supposed to understand, something that was supposed to be easy to me, but I had no guide, no interaction, no help. And so what they think they're telling me is, look, it's so easy. I can do this so quickly. You can clearly do it also. But as a student, what it felt like was it's easy. I did it. You can't? Clearly that's your fault. It's not something wrong with your teacher. It's not something wrong with your curriculum. It's not something wrong with your school. It's something wrong with you, fundamentally not being able to understand this easy thing, because anyone can learn to code, right? Clearly. And so phrases like this are not only like so depressing for students to hear, but they put the onus for learning on the student themselves. It doesn't attribute any responsibility to the institution, to the teacher, to the curriculum. It takes that all away and says it's easy, clearly, duh, look at all these people who've done it. You can do it too. And that's not fair for students, because different students don't excel or succeed because they have an innate ability. Like, computers are relatively new when you compare them to, humans. They've been on this earth for a long time. I don't know if you've heard of them, but I don't think typing is an innate ability. So your success depends a lot on your educational foundation. It depends a lot on what you grew up with, what you have exposure to. I wasn't exposed to technology as a full-time job until I was 22, 23. And so I didn't consider programming a career until then. Wasn't exposed to the thought process, took longer to learn it. If you're 8 and your mom or your dad is an engineer, you're going to be exposed to that a little earlier. That's just an educational foundation. That's an advantage that one child has over another. So speaking of tiny humans, I'm going to segue real quick and go into how we actually teach kids, what it means to be a kid going to school in America, how we learn, what happens. We put a lot of emphasis on achievement in schools. We always have. You get grades. Unless you're maybe on Arrested Development and you get like hearts on your report card, you get letter grades. You're told this is how well you're doing. This is how well you're doing compared to the rest of your class. These are your metrics. And in the past, say about 5 years ago or so, leveling was really, really common in schools. They would place students at their current level instead of challenging them. And this is a quote from a teacher who taught at one of the schools. And the most important part is that if a student's in the 5th grade and they're reading at the 3rd grade level, they actually spend their day reading at the 3rd grade level. And so you progressively continue to fall behind under the leveling system. And the example she has of this was just so astounding to me. And again, this is 5th grade, so time travel a little here with me. And she says, in one level, students were learning about the founders of our nation. In another level, the word founders was taken out because it was determined to be too difficult. And a student would read a sentence that says, Ben Franklin started the nation. And that's not that big of a difference. It's a few words changed. But how are you ever going to learn the word founders if the people who design curriculum for 5th graders reading at a 3rd grade level don't think you can comprehend it? And so a bunch of people got together and said, this sucks, let's change it. And now we have Common Core, which has been adapted in, I believe, 43 states plus Washington, D.C. And it is not super popular. The pitch is that it's a set of high-quality academic standards in math and English and language arts. They are learning goals for every grade, and they outline what students should learn, and they were created to ensure that every student graduates from high school with the skills and knowledge necessary to succeed in college, career, and life, regardless of where they live. And I don't know about you, but where you live matters a lot in terms of what type of teachers you have. And their goal here was that the U.S. curriculum sucks. Let's do some research and base some of our new stuff off of international curriculum, because all international places, are better at us than school. And this is a great idea. It's a good concept. But unfortunately, it didn't go over very well. It gets a lot of flack. Teachers were not prepared. They were not trained. And they have no idea how to teach math in this new way. I don't know if you've ever seen some of the math problems for Common Core. Just, if you ever need a good laugh, go ahead and Google them. It's very different than the way that most of us learn. And so we have unprepared teachers taking these wonderful, in theory, education reforms, and they're just flopping. Kids are doing even worse than they were before. And so Common Core is clearly not the solution. It's just checkbox learning. It's no different than it was before. You need to do X, Y, Z to be done in the 3rd grade. And if you don't do X, Y, Z, then you can't move on to the next level. And it's just a Band-Aid. We're not fixing dropout rates. We're not helping students in impoverished schools. We're just shoving more complex curriculum on them and overburdening already overburdened teachers. And so to give a quick picture about how the demographics are playing out, I looked at some of the top 5 STEM high schools in the U.S., and that's about 5,700 students in the U.S. every year. And that's not 5,700 that graduate, it's the total student body for these 5 schools. I was actually really impressed with some of the statistics that I saw. The top 5 STEM schools are 63% minority and 37% white. And given the demographics of the U.S., this is a little surprising. It's actually a little better than the U.S. is. And then you look at the breakdown. There's lots of stuff on here. So don't worry about it too much. There's no tests. But the thing that was really concerning to me was the Native American, Hawaiian, Pacific Islander students. Some schools, when I did the math, because they don't actually tell you how many students, they just tell you the percentage of the total, there were 0.6 Native American students at one of these schools. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're 1 of 1 or 1 of 5. It just sucks. Like, it does. It's kind of bad when you look at whether or not they teach impoverished students. It's not great. So only 0.6% of the students at the top 5 STEM schools were below the poverty line. Not at, actually below. I'll get to you in just a second. And this data all comes from Newsweek. It's data the schools self-report to the government. So there's always a margin of error. But what is 0.6% of 5,700 students? I did math. 37 kids. And that's actually 1 school, not 5. Only 1 school reported that they had any impoverished students. So the other 4 just don't care. Or they don't serve impoverished students. So 37 kids. And so I was like, okay, cool. I'll look at the worst schools too and do like some comparisons and see what's going on here and like what the demographics are. I tried really, really hard. Nobody wants to talk about the worst schools in America. Nobody wants to make a list of the worst schools in America. I found some stuff that was like correlated with crime and correlated with dropout rates, but I couldn't find anything about the quality of the education or the quality of the teachers. No parent wants to know their kid is going to the worst school in the country, but they want to know if their kid's going to the best one because Harvard, yay. So instead of doing that, I looked at some literacy rates, and this is nationally reported by, I can't remember, it's on another slide, but they consider basic to be your grade level. And so this is 4th grade. And a third of 4th graders are at their grade level or below. When you get to 8th grade, you see a slight improvement, but only 7% of the students are actually able to move from reading at their grade level or move up to reading at their grade level. And some states, I read the fine print, some states consider being at your grade level to be 1 or 2 levels below. So you could have 26% of your 8th graders reading at a 6th grade level and include them in your above basic at some schools, which made me very sad. I looked at some ethnic and racial breakdowns. The bottom bar is 36%, and the top bar is 44%. It's not terribly surprising. I looked at some correlations between schools and the other students. There was one school that had the majority of its graduating Black students were 2 grades below the level, and they had all of their white students, like 2% of them, were at the grade level. So it's really hard to find the data about bad schools because people don't want to share it. They just kind of want to ignore it. Or I found out from an educator, they change administrations, and then the data is no longer relevant because they've changed administrations. And so the important question to me when I was looking at all this data was, why are we letting an industry trend dictate what we teach to kids? Why are we pushing more advanced concepts onto them when they are not meeting standards for reading and math? What's going on there? And I like to think of it as a difference between the career of now and the career of 5, maybe 10 years ago. So now the big thing is be an engineer, learn to code, be a technical worker. And so we have to teach our kids how to do this so they can be set up for success, because this is the most likely way for them to be successful. But 5 or 10 years ago, were we teaching our kids how to be stockbrokers and lawyers in elementary school? We weren't teaching kids in the era of Ford's heyday how to be industrial workers on the assembly line. Like, we're letting career trends actually impact what we teach to kids because we think we know, based on the past few years, what is our best option. And that kind of sucks. Maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe we should, not put all the eggs in one basket. So shifting gears again to the American dream and what this kind of is, what it means. I'm going to give you a brief history because this is kind of one of those nebulous things that I'd heard about but couldn't pin down. And so it was coined in 1931 by this guy whose last name is Adams. He wrote a book called The Epic of America. And it is pompous as I tried to make it sound. He believed that the American dream was not only the most precious national possession that we had, but it was our unique contribution to civilizing the world. It was what made America America, and yes, we were awesome. And it's so pervasive, it's so widely known that everybody kind of has an idea of what it is. They've heard of it, they're familiar with it. And so I did a super informal study of my friends and coworkers about what they think it is. White picket fences and owning your own house was one I got a few times. Striking it rich and becoming a millionaire. Being an entrepreneur from a friend who's relatively wealthy versus being your own boss from my mom who grew up working class. Nuclear families and not worrying about money. From a friend who's an immigrant recently. Coming to America with nothing and becoming rich because of your own will to succeed. And I don't know if this one was a joke or not, but it's kind of accurate. Elon Musk, he is Tesla. And my last friend said, I'm not sure, but it seems like a lot of rich white men know what it is, and they don't want to share it. So, but what did Adam say was, other than, our most precious baby angel contribution to the world? And the really big thing here is that it's a vision to develop a better, deeper, richer life for everyone, regardless of the position to which you were born in, by accident of birth. And it's a dream of the chance to rise in the economic scale, but it's a chance to do that, to develop your abilities to the full, completely unhampered by any unjust restrictions, whether they be caste, custom, or law. And so the American dream isn't just about the individual achievement and unlocking, it's about individual achievement. And unlocking those barriers, who cares? Like, those barriers are in your way. This is what startups do. This is what it means to disrupt. This is the way we describe the tech industry. You're actively working and fighting these barriers to get that individual success and wealth by capitalizing on your idea and writing the code for that idea. And interestingly enough, Forbes, in that little article that they wrote about their self-made score, where Mark Zuckerberg's an 8, Oprah's a 10, poor Oprah, they said that over the past 30 years, the number of the Forbes 400 members forging their own path has increased so much that it's really clear that the American dream is alive and well. And yeah, thanks, that was easy. So we're going to tie this all together. We're talking about the programming industry, educating kids, and big, big, big money dreams. Going back to whether or not anyone can learn to code, this is a fundamental core of our industry that makes us very successful. It is a double-edged sword. It's a good thing and a bad thing. The foundation of our field is that we can learn a new web framework in a weekend. We can deploy with new technologies. We can teach ourselves all of these new things. That's what makes our industry so able to work so quickly and churn out these wonderful new technologies. Like, I know most of my engineering friends taught themselves a new programming language over a weekend, or decided to write their own JavaScript framework in a weekend. And that's not abnormal. Our industry loves people who do this. We thrive because of people who do this, who make these open source technologies for us. And we do this so well that it's starting to kind of seep into the way we educate programmers at the university level. We're increasing barriers to entry to these courses. A lot of universities are adding caps to classes, to those like introductory level 101 level classes. You have to have the right GPA. You have to have the right prerequisites. You have to get into that class before everyone else. So all those students who have priority registration, which was never me, so I'm a little jealous about this, could get into the class, but you can't. And so the students who are the smartest, who come to school or come to their 4-year university with the most education, with the most background, have a better chance at getting the education they want. The students who are lacking at their high school level or at their junior high school level, who may or may not be at the university on a scholarship, are now having their chance to learn computer science severely restricted because they don't have the GPA, they don't have the support, or they're in a 300-person class with no resource for help to improve that bad grade that's preventing them from moving on. And you can't learn to code if you don't have the right tools, if you can't find the right help. And so some students are learning with pens and paper. I have a friend who used to teach at an underprivileged school in Las Vegas. She taught kids from, I think, 6th grade to 9th grade or so how to code with pens and papers. They were writing conditional statements on pens and paper and like using beans to like see what happens. They didn't have the right tools, so they improvised, but they also had somebody who went out of their way to do it. That's not normal. That's not common. And so the educational foundations that you have give you that advantage because now those 6th to 9th graders know what a conditional is. They're a few steps ahead of other kids going to similarly impoverished schools who don't have access to that information. And while it's great that we can all teach ourselves, and while it's great that we can develop these new things, we can't expect that of everyone in our industry, because then we're just employing and producing the same people who are doing the same things over and over and over. To succeed, to continue thriving, we have to stop expecting people to be able to do everything on their own. If we could do everything on our own, why do we need 250 engineers to run a company? Really, though, it's a good question. And so if you think about it outside of, can anyone learn to code? I think of little me growing up with 2 parents. So I usually had someone at home, and I had a school that had computers in the library, so I had access to the internet. So all things told, I didn't have it that bad. If I was a kid now in that same situation, I could get access to these learning resources. I could try out Ruby with Code School. I could type on some HTML on a little cloud development environment. I could host my own website without owning my own computer or having internet in my home. And that's pretty cool, but you can't say that to everybody. You can't just go and say, hey, anyone can learn to code. My brother has Asperger's. It would be insurmountably difficult for him to teach himself how to code. And if you don't have a home and a place to study, it's more difficult. And it's not a contest, but if you don't speak English and you live in America, where most of our resources and help are available in English, or you're a single parent and you don't have a lot of time for yourself because kids are a ton of work, can you really say that anyone can learn to code to these people? Probably not. It's not really fair. You're asking them to take on a really big burden just to join an industry that is probably not going to be super welcoming of them. So what we really mean when we say anyone can learn to code is that anyone with sufficient privilege, educational background, and access to tools can learn to code. And there's a lot of crap in between the anyone and the can learn to code there. And even then, even if you have the sufficient privilege and the educational background and the access, that doesn't mean that you have learned them well enough or taught yourself well enough or become good enough to secure a job as an engineer. So you can learn to code, but can you learn to program? Can you learn to be an engineer? It gets even more complicated when you go down that route. And so just like the American dream, learning to code isn't really for everyone. It's not something that anybody can do. You're going to be more successful about getting that house with that white picket fence if you have a job that pays you well enough to save up for a down payment and a mortgage. And this American dream concept is really very easy to see when you look at the money that surrounds the Learn to Code movement. October 2014 was the 5th highest month for startup investments in the past 2 years. It's $1.2 billion was invested in a single month in startups. And there hasn't been a month that high since October 2014. We talk a lot about money when we train junior developers. At Dev Bootcamp, they tell us the average junior dev makes $73,000 a year. And they have locations in New York City, Chicago, and San Francisco. Good luck living on that in New York City. Hack Reactor says that 98% job placement rate in 90 days within graduation and $110,000 average annual salary for a junior developer. Flatiron School, also based in New York, tells us that graduates' net salaries starting upwards of $70,000. And Code.org, a home of the Hour of Code, tells us that computer science is a top-paying college degree and that there's a $500 billion opportunity for those jobs. These are numbers that I don't even know what that math is. Like, I cannot envision 500 million or 500 billion. I can't envision that. And so the future is here, but are you ready? Are you equipped to create this? This is the landing page for the Dev Bootcamp site as of a few months ago. Starter School wants to know if you want to sell sugared water for the rest of your life, or if you want to come with Steve Jobs, who said this quote, to poach an executive from Pepsi. Do you want to come and change the world with me? The guy left Pepsi, by the way. And Hack Reactor claims that it's the CS degree for the 21st century, and that Hack Reactor is the Harvard of boot camps. Skill Crush tells you that it doesn't matter where you live or what you do, digital skills are job skills. 3 months to a more fulfilling and lucrative career, or your money back, and there are 279,585 high-paying open jobs in tech. What are you waiting for? And so this is part of the reason why these boot camps have so much backlash. They're promising the world, and they can't deliver. They're promising the American dream to all of their students. But that's the point of the American dream, is not everybody can have it. Everybody can aspire to it. So you can't promise $110,000 a year and a job within 90 days to all of your students without people getting a little pissed at you when that's not what you're delivering. Or when your students can't find a job, or when they're hired and then they get fired because they're not a very good coworker. So these boot camp programs have repackaged the American dream. They've sold it as a scheme. They've sold it as a job, as a career, as a lifestyle. You do this, you can do it, it's there. You just have to unleash your potential. You have to do all the work and give us all of your money, and you'll be successful. But what happens when you're not successful? Your fault. Bootcamps don't really have anything to say about the students that they ask to leave, or the students that choose to drop out, or the ones that end up leaving the field. They actually don't really talk about attrition in tech either. When I was in my bootcamp program, they asked 3 students to leave because they weren't good enough. And they improved their screening program as a result, and so they don't accept students who aren't qualified. But those people quit jobs and got loans to pay for this program. And it's their fault that they could not learn a new programming language in 9 weeks. Programs are saying to you what the American dream is doing is it's telling you it's not broken, it's not unobtainable, it's not privileged, it's for everyone. You're the problem because you couldn't figure out how to find the prime factor in Ruby. And I am terrible with algorithms. I still don't know how to figure out prime factors writing in any programming language. And if I had listened to the people telling me that that was an essential skill, I wouldn't be an engineer. Okay, I probably would be, but like, if you pass the tests and if you achieve the goals, you're held up as victorious. You're the prime example of success at that school. But if there It's so easy. And if there are so many of us that go through these programs, why are so few of us so victorious? Why aren't there more people who are victorious and talking about how awesome their program was? Why are there hundreds of thousands of people applying for these programs, being encouraged by a small handful, a small percentage of that number as successful, as employed, as having a career, and as happy in that career? I'm sorry, it's depressing. There are things that we can do about this, and I don't think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that there are some great things that come out of these boot camps. I think that there are some great things that come out of our educational system. But these small changes can make a huge difference if you mentor somebody who's in one of these programs, if you're attending one of these programs, if you work there or have any connections with people who work there. Setting realistic expectations for job and skill seekers is huge. Some people spend 6 months to a year looking for a job after they finish these programs. Improving our schools for kids by supporting education-focused initiatives, and instead of teaching kids how to code in school, bringing code into their math lessons, bringing code into their reading lessons. So it is just a different way to learn the skills you're already learning. Cut the hype and don't buy into the hype. Don't be me. Don't buy into the hype and hope you get a job, because this is kind of sad, but it can be better. We can make it better. We just have to work a little harder. The American dream should be a positive thing that any child can achieve, not just the privileged. It should push us to be bigger, better, faster, and more, and there should be opportunities for us to be bigger, better, faster, and more at whatever it is we choose to do. That's it.